In this video, we're going to talk about how to EV train your Pokemon in Fire Red and Leaf Green. So what exactly is EV training? Well, EV stands for effort value, and to keep things pretty simple, it's just some imaginary point that influences a Pokemon's stats. The more EVs that you have in a specific stat, the higher that Pokemon's stat will be when it reaches level 100 or just progresses throughout the game. So one question you might be having is, why would you want to do this? One reason is it's pretty cool to train a Pokemon to have its highest potential stats and be kind of the best version of, themselves in a sense. However, a more practical reason also is, if you're training for the Battle Frontier, you're going to need to have the strongest Pokemon that you can, or if you also want to battle against your friends as well, but mostly for the Battle Frontier, you're going to need to have Pokemon with very high stats in order to compete. Although EV training doesn't necessarily encompass everything you need to do in order to get a Pokemon's highest stats, for the amount of time you invest into it, the return is quite high. One thing I want to note is, as you play through any Pokemon game, your Pokemon will naturally gain EVs by defeating other Pokemon. However, this type of training is kind of random because you're not focusing on specific or targeted EVs, so your EVs over the course of the game are going to be more balanced, which makes your stats at higher levels a lot more balanced and not as high as they could potentially be. So EV training just happens naturally over time, whether you want it to or not. This process just ensures that the EVs that we want are maxed out, and it's a specific strategy to ensure that no other random EVs are getting put in stats that we don't necessarily want. So although EV training happens naturally and you can do it whenever you want, any part of the game, we are going to be focusing on post-game, activities for Fire Red and Leaf Green. This just ensures that you have all the locations accessed, you have certain items, as well as enough money to support this type of training. Also, like I mentioned earlier, EV training is not all encompassing. IV breeding and nature selection is also equally important, although IV breeding takes a while, and for the majority of people, it's probably not worth it. However, if you want to see a video diving deeper into that, I will post that in the link below. But just know, if you want perfect stats, you need perfect IVs and perfect EVs with a beneficial nature. Towards the end of the video, I'm going to give an example of a Pokemon that I'm currently EV training, so you'll be able to see this in practice. But anyway, getting into more EV training specific stuff, the total number of EVs any Pokemon can have is 510. However, technically 508 is the maximum number, because for every 4 EVs that you put into one stat, you will gain 1 additional stat point at level 100. And since 510 is not divisible by 4, 2 EVs are essentially useless. Also note that each specific stat can have a maximum of 252 maximum EVs. So that means you can have 2 max stats at 252 EVs, which leaves 6 remaining EVs, only 4 of which will actually influence that Pokemon's actual stat. But also keep in mind, you can only have 252 maximum stats per EV. As a quick note too, this is just assuming you want maximum stats in 2 stats. You can kind of add any amount of EVs to any amount of stats as you want. But typically when you train a Pokemon, you're usually doing like speed and attack, speed, special attack, or like HP and attack, stuff like that. So typically you are maximizing 2 stats, but again, there are other situations and reasons for adding other EVs to other stats. One important item that you need for this process that will help save you a lot of time is getting the Macho Brace. This is going to double the amount of EVs gained when you defeat a Pokemon. You can get this item after you defeat Giovanni in Viridian City. To get this item, it's kind of specific. You need to defeat Giovanni, then where he's standing will have the Macho Brace, but you need to use the item finder. So it's a little weird, but that's how you get it. If you do have Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, it's kind of a lot easier. North of the Electric Gym, I think it's Mawile City, there's like that yellow house. Just defeat all those people in there and they'll give you the Macho Brace. That's another way to get it. But this item is going to really speed up the process. The next thing you're going to need are vitamins. Vitamins are going to be a really easy way to get the first 100 EVs in any stat that you want to train. It does cost a lot of money, but it is definitely worth it. One thing to note though is you can only use vitamins within the first 100 EVs per stat. So one thing to keep in mind is use all the vitamins first in all your stats before you go out and defeat other Pokemon. It's just, I think, a good habit to have, and that's kind of what I do. You can get them on the 5th floor in Celadon City. Which vitamin to use is kind of self-explanatory. However, each vitamin is going to give you plus 10 EVs in that specific stat. And again, you can use 10 per stat. Vitamins do cost a lot of money. However, there is a really easy way to get a lot of money in Fire Red Leaf Green. That is why I do a majority of my training in this game, or these games. I already did make a video on that, So check that out if you want to make, you make a lot of money really quick, but you do need access to, I think, Island 5, and you need the amulet coin and stuff like that. Anyway, it's in the video. Check it out if you would need more money. Now we're going to talk about locations to go to get more EVs. As a reminder, every time you defeat a Pokemon, that Pokemon will drop essentially whatever EVs it gives. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be multiple different EVs in different stats. So the first location is for HP. I typically go to Viridian Forest. It seems to be one of the better spots. HP EVs is probably the hardest one to get in this game, although again, it's not really that hard. Caterpie is going to have a 40% spawn rate here, and every time you defeat a Caterpie, you'll get 1 HP EV. One thing also good about Viridian Forest is it does have Metapod and Kakuna, which do have defensive EVs. And typically, if you're training HP, sometimes you also do want defense and special defense EVs. So this does also help kind of speed up the process with HP and defensive EVs in one location. Also, Shiny Caterpie is really cool, so if you do a lot of grinding here, you might get one. For the next location, we're going to fly over to the Pokemon Center on Route 4 and head into Mount Moon. We're going to go down one of these ladders and into like this intermediate area zone. Here, Paris spawns 100% of the time and will give us 1 attack EV per defeat. This is definitely the fastest way in this game to get these EVs. Next up, if we fly back down to Pallet Town and we use Surf in this grass area, Tangela spawns here 100% of the time, and this is how we'll get defensive EVs. Tangela will drop 1 defensive EV per defeat. For special attack, if we fly on over to Lavender Town and go into the Pokemon Tower, if we go onto the 2nd floor, we will find Haunter and Ghastly. Haunter and Ghastly combined will have a 91% spawn rate, and Ghastly will drop 1 special attack EV and Haunter will drop 2. The other Pokemon here is Cubone, and if you do encounter it, just run away because that drops defensive EVs and you typically don't want them if you're only running special attack. Next up, we're going to fly over to Vermilion City and use Surf. Here we're going to find Tentacool 100% of the time, and that'll give us 1 special defense EV per defeat. Tentacool you can encounter in like almost any surfing route. However, Vermilion City is just one location and it does have a 100% spawn rate, so this is just one spot that I picked, but there are also many others. The last stat's going to be speed EVs. If you head on over to Route 1, both Rattata and Pidgey are going to drop 1 speed EV per defeat, and those two combined encounter rate is 100%, so this is definitely a very ideal spot. As a note, there are plenty of other locations you can go to, and typically if you are training different stats at the same time, you might want to pick a different place that has wild Pokemon with multiple stats that you're training. However, if you're targeting only 1 stat and you want to train that 1 stat quickly, I think these are pretty optimal locations. If you do want like an all-inclusive list of the different EVs that Pokemon can get when you defeat them, I will be adding a lot of link in the description. So I want to go through an example. I just finished breeding this Larvitar, and I did IV breed it, so it does have some really good innate stats, which are going to influence its stats when it hits like level 100 or later down the road. But again, watch that other video because it kind of gets in more detailed. But essentially, make sure that before you EV train any Pokemon, if you wanted to IV breed it, you have had to do that prior because you cannot influence the stats once you EV train it. You also want to make sure that its nature is the ideal one that you want, or at least the one that's going to be beneficial. And if you want any egg moves on it, you're going to need to have that all done again prior. At a minimum, I recommend having a beneficial nature. So for this Larvitar, I wanted modest nature, which is a an increase in special attack and a decrease in attack. No matter what, you're probably going to need to do some level of breeding before EV training, even if it's just getting the nature that you want. This might sound time consuming, but it really isn't, and it does go a long way. So once you have a Pokemon that you've either bred or caught and it is ideal for the one that you want, the EV training process begins. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is equip the Matra Brace because I don't want to forget. Also, I am going to write down the stats that I'm going to be targeting in EV training. Again, one thing to note is there's no in-game way to check your EVs, so make sure that you're keeping track through this entire process and saving a lot because you don't want to either mess up or lose track and not know where you are. So next up, I'm going to give Larvitar some vitamins. I am training this Larvitar really interestingly, I guess, so maybe don't copy this, but essentially I'm going to give all the vitamins that I need to give the Larvitar before I go and EV train it. So I'm going to give Larvitar 10 HP ups, which is going to give it 100 EVs and HP. Then we give Larvitar some irons, which are going to increase its defensive EVs. I gave Larvitar 8 of those, so now we're at 80 EVs in defensive stat. Next up, I gave Larvitar 7 calciums, which increases its special attack stat. So now that's 70 EVs in special attack. And then I'm going to give Larvitar 9 special defense vitamins, so we're at 90 EVs. These are all the vitamins that I'm going to be giving Larvitar right now. We're going to finish everything else off with the defeating Pokemon. So I'm going to head on over to the Viridian Forest and start defeating some Caterpie. So one thing to keep in mind though is, again, make sure you have the Macho Brace on. It's going to double the amount of EVs. So I'm going to be maxing out the HP stat so I can have 252 EVs in HP. We just used 10 vitamins, which is going to put our EVs at 100. So that gives me 152 EVs that I need to fill to get the maximum amount of EVs in HP. Each Caterpie is going to give me 1 HP stat, and the Macho Brace is going to double those EVs. So 152 divided by 2 is going to give me 76. So that means I need to defeat 76 Caterpie to maximize my EVs in the HP stat. Every time I defeat a Caterpie, I'm going to make a little mark to give myself a reminder that, hey, I defeated one Caterpie. Like I mentioned earlier, this zone also has Metapod and Kakuna. For every Metapod you defeat, it's going to give you 2 defensive EVs. And since the Macho Brace doubles that, you get 4 defensive EVs per Metapod or Kakuna defeat. Since I am also training this Larvitar with some defensive EVs, I am going to defeat them and mark it in my little sticky note. This process does take like an hour, sometimes 2 hours, depending on how quickly you go. But overall, it's not too bad. The HP stat is the only one that I'm actually maximizing for this Larvitar. So this is going to be the longest stat in this entire process. So after I'm done defeating the 76 Caterpie, I just give you guys a quick rundown on the stats, what it looks like. And there are 76 tally marks there, each representing 2 EVs that were gained from 1 Caterpie defeat. And I also defeated 3 Metapod for a total of 6 EVs. I did kind of actually mess up here. I only meant to defeat 2 Metapod, but I actually defeated 1 additional one. Not the end of the world, to be honest. We're not making world records over here. We're just trying to get some super strong Pokemon. The special defense EVs are going to be capped at 90. And again, 90 divided by 4 is not equal. And that's where we're going to leave our 2 random EVs that aren't going to be, are pretty much useless. But for these last EVs, I need to head on over to the Pokemon Tower and defeat some Ghastly to get some special attack EVs. Once that is done, we have completed the training. So we have 252 HP EVs. We have 92 defensive EVs, 76 special attack, and 90 special defense EVs. This added up gives you 510 total EVs. So this Pokemon is now maxed out in its EVs, so none of that could be changed moving forward, which is a good thing again because we have already influenced our Pokemon stats to the maximum extent. So now the last step is to train this Pokemon to 100. I mean, you don't necessarily have to, but that's what I like to do just to see the maximum stats, and then I'm going to take it to the Battle Frontier. So kind of in a nutshell and without overcomplicating it, hopefully I didn't, that's EV training, and this is a great way to get your Pokemon to have high stats while maximizing your time. Anyway, though, that kind of wraps it up. Hopefully you found this useful and enjoyable. Hopefully now you get out there, do some EV training, get your Pokemon have some pretty high stats so they can be competitive for the Battle Frontier. And I guess whatever other challenges and things you want to do in your Pokemon adventure. It's also kind of fun just to kind of train your Pokemon and get them as strong as they could be. I don't know if I'm weird like that, but I think it's pretty cool. I hope you enjoyed the video though. Stay tuned for some more Pokemon content. See you all later. Good luck on your adventures. Take care.